Shake, 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 do, 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 shake, 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 shake your roster. It's time to shake things up again. WWE's draft has just come and gone, and once again, they've loaded their roster into a box, shook it up like a child figuring out what their Christmas gift sounds like, and then dumped them out to see what brands they land on. From time to time, the WWE draft, or superstar shakeup, have made for pretty memorable moments. Cena and Batista taking their talents and their titles to the other show, the whole 2002 system with Flair and Vince making their choices as opposed to a war room of nameless television pricks and a robot. They had their moments, but not many of them. For the most part, the WWE draft has been a pretty unimaginative, uncreative experience, making for often drab, uninspired shows, or, at their worst, some really dumb ones. Guess what we're here to discuss today? I'm Tempest hailing from partsFUNknown, and these are the 10 dumbest WWE draft moments ever. But before we get on with this list, make sure of course that you like this video, subscribe, and enable notifications to always on so you never miss a fun list just like it, and maybe let us know in the comments below what topics you would like to see covered on a list in the near future. Number 10, Rey Mysterio drafted away from Mexican viewership. It felt like a pretty big deal when Rey Mysterio was drafted to Raw to start the 2008 WWE draft. Since his debut in 2002, he had been a SmackDown guy 100% of the time. And then they realized you can't get Raw in Mexico, and they just drafted the one and only Mexican superstar away from SmackDown, resulting in a massive drop in SmackDown's Mexican viewership. Whoops! From a content standpoint, Rey being drafted to Raw wasn't that dumb of a move. It gave him some fresh matchups and some new scenery for the first time in his WWE career, but it certainly wasn't anything that made up for that loss. Rey feuded with Kane and then Mike Knox to close out 2008, two feuds that didn't bring any eyeballs to the show, and then won the Intercontinental title from JBL in a 21-second match with no build at WrestleMania 25 before WWE course-corrected and drafted him back to SmackDown with maximum efficiency. Thankfully, by the time he was drafted to Raw again in 2011, you could get both shows in Mexico, so that move was no problemo. Number 9, drafting Gable Steveson. There's wasted draft picks, and then there's wasted draft picks. Like a trade for the ability to draft Brian Bosworth level of wasted draft pick. For WWE, that came in 2021 in the form of Gable Steveson, the Olympic gold medalist and WWE hopeful who a year and a half later has yet to make his in-ring debut. A draft pick done for the sole purpose of getting us all to say, oh yeah, he exists. There were probably a bunch of folk who were hoping Steveson would pick up the squared circle thing with the speed of fellow Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, but that is an impossible thing to wish upon anyone. That being said, I would love to know the thought process behind drafting Gable Steveson to Raw in 2021, a full 6 months before he would even be allowed to hit one suplex on the other Gable at WrestleMania 38. It is now 2023 and we have not seen hide nor Olympic gold of Steveson since. This isn't to say Gable won't pan out in WWE, but I think it's pretty safe to say that as far as being a 2021 draft pick, he's about as big a bust as you can get. Mark my words, he probably debuts on SmackDown too. Number 8, drafting Hit Row. Okay, this one still feels personal. I take you all back to the time that was summer of 2021. Pete and I had just formed LIW, we were starting to go outside again, and we had fallen in love with Hit Row. The group that was the most entertaining thing to hit NXT in the year 2021, which was far from the peak of NXT interest, but still had some bangers nonetheless. Hit Row had swagger, a unique presentation, and by all accounts sky-high potential. Isaiah Swerve Scott was proving himself to be a potential main event star in waiting, the others were learning, and then they got drafted to SmackDown.
This is a nightmare!
Yeah, this was like the worst time ever for WWE. They were always touting their desire to look for new top stars, and then would call up some folk from NXT and fire them with the quickness. Hit Row got drafted on October 1st. 34 days later, B-Fab was released, and then 15 days after that, the rest of them got the boot too. What was the point? Congrats on giving another top guy to AEW, wits. But like I said, this was personal. Number 7, splitting up teams. Did Vince McMahon ever have a friend growing up? Did they break his heart, steal his favorite baseball card, anything? Because there must be some reason for Vinnie Mac's love of splitting up all these tag teams. Sure, there have been some teams that may have been due for a split. Miz and Morrison in 2009 were both earmarked for singles pushes, and hey, if both guys are going to benefit from going their separate ways, then I'm all for it. But you cannot look me in the eye and tell me that anyone thought drafting Sanity and Nikki Cross to different shows was going to help anyone. Or for that matter, splitting up teams like the Dudley Boys in 2002 and the New Day in 2020. Sure, the New Day have all stayed relevant after Big E was taken from them, with the biggest of ease even reigning as WWE Champion on Raw, but splitting up the New Day made them sad, and how dare you make these lovely lads sad? The Dudleys, however, just didn't work apart. Bubba found the nearest available Dudley to continue the whole tag thing, while Devon found religion, and then they found themselves back together in short order. Teamwork makes the dream function after all. Number 6, the entire 2007 draft. There have been a fair few WWE Superstar draft ups that have been largely inconsequential, but then there's the 2007 draft, which was entirely inconsequential. Now, granted, not a lot of this could be considered WWE's fault unless one of the members of management came out as clairvoyant, but just look at these picks. King Booker to Raw, gone from WWE 2 months later. Bobby Lashley to Raw, injured 1 month later and then gone from WWE. The Boogeyman to ECW, injured 3 months later and gone for a year. Tori Wilson to SmackDown, gone from WWE 5 months later. Chris Masters to SmackDown, gone from WWE 4 months later. Ric Flair to SmackDown, still did most of his big angles on Raw and then retired less than a year later. Mr. Kennedy to Raw, injured and suspended for much of the time and then moved back to SmackDown the following year. Snitsky to Raw, basically a jobber after a failed push centered around bad teeth. Britt Baker would be disgusted. Then all that's left is Chris Benoit to ECW, and enough said there, and the Great Khali to SmackDown, who did win the vacant World Heavyweight title just weeks later, but the less remembered about that, the better. Time to shake things up. God, stop! You shook it too much! Number 5, the Viking Experience. So much nonsense has happened over the last 4 years. We were legit getting weeks where Brock squashed Kofi and then Seth killed The Fiend with some kind of hammer 2 days apart, so you best believe there was plenty to complain about. So much, in fact, that you might forget about some of these equally ridiculous things. Calling up the War Raiders from NXT while they were still the NXT Tag Team Champions isn't immediately a bad idea. They're great wrestlers, seemingly fit for the main roster. Just make sure you have a good reason to pull them out of NXT ahead of schedule and you're good. No. You can't do that. All they had was renaming them to sound like a 4D ride at Universal Studios. Like a rubbish summer camp team building course. Like a group of drama school students teaching you about Norse mythology via rap. Thankfully, the name didn't stick, but Hanson still became Ivar and Ray Rose still became Eric. It's been 4 years and there's still a member of the WWE roster whose entire ring name is just Eric. Number 4, drafting the wrong belts. You would think that color coordinating your belts to match your shows like a children's cartoon would make problems like this avoidable. On more than one occasion, WWE has drafted the red champ to the blue show and the blue champ to the red show. First in 2020 when the Raw tag champs the Street Profits put on blue pennies and the SmackDown tag champs the New Day put on red pennies. How would they solve this problem? Change the name of the belts to be non-brand specific? Nah, they just met up at the old swap meet and exchanged belts. What's a lineage? And then they did the exact same thing the following year with the women's belts, with Raw champ Charlotte and SmackDown champ Becky Lynch also trading their cummerbunds like the props that they were in a very tense moment. Watch our list of the 10 most unprofessional wrestling moments ever caught on camera to see just how tense. But while trading belts has been a new thing for WWE, trading belts away from their home isn't, as ECW champions Bobby Lashley and Kane were both drafted to Raw in 2007 and 2008. Blaster Lindsay was stripped of his belt, but Kane was just the ECW champion on Raw for a week. It's almost like naming your belts after specific shows is a bad idea. Number 3, Vince McMahon is crushed. Speaking of former ECW champions, Vince McMahon was a steady presence during the 2008 WWE draft. Was he announcing picks or involved in a major storyline? Nah, he was burning money. Almost literally, in fact. This was the culmination of McMahon's $1 Million Mania. Only slightly more ridiculous than WrestleMania. Join the New World Ollie today, where Vince would give away $1 million of his own money each week on Raw. At the draft, just after giving away $500,000, the entire WWE set imploded, with the Almighty Aller crushing Vince dead. Well, not quite dead, but nearly dead enough for Vince to devolve into melodrama, crying, "I can't feel my legs," as he was stretchered out as the show went off the air. It was rather sweet to see guys like Edge, Triple H, and John Cena all put their differences aside to tend to their crushed boss, but it doesn't quite make up for this incredibly unserious situation being made to look like the most ultra-serious angle in WWE's history. Number 2, Jim Ross, please stand up. Why do WWE hate Jim Ross? Is it because he's Southern? Is it because he worked for WCW? Is it because Vince McMahon just needs a punching bag? No matter which way you slice it, Vince sure comes across as a very well-adjusted human being for sure, as was on display at the 2008 WWE Draft. Boy, this was a dumb show, wasn't it? Mick Foley had spent the prior few weeks saying he'd hoped that he would be doing commentary with good old JR after the draft, and when they teed up a segment by saying this was an announcers only draft pick match, the writing may as well have been on the wall and spelled in barbecue sauce. Sure enough, Jim Ross was drafted to SmackDown and Michael Cole was drafted to Raw, and the real dumb bit is they never told Jim Ross about it. He had to find out his entire life was going to be turned upside down, and his acclaimed partnership with Jerry Lawler had come to an end, all with a camera pointed right in his face. It's so awkward and uncomfortable as JR just stands up, confused, and moves to his new desk. And yeah, he's visibly pissed off, and it turns out so is everyone else on the announced team because they're not whack jobs who take pleasure in the discomfort of their colleagues. And number 1, John Cena kills the draft. God, this made me mad when I was but a 14-year-old John Cena hating wrestling fan. And really, still kind of makes me mad now. What was the reason for this?
What was the reason? What was the reason?
SmackDown was in need of a refresh in 2011 with the retirement of Edge clearing way for a top guy, and for John Cena to be moved first on the night, that was pretty much as big a move as you could get. Cool, I'm on board so far. And then the rest of the show goes off with Randy Orton also moving to SmackDown, Rey Mysterio and Alberto Del Rio moving to Raw, and then the final draft pick of the night flashes up on screen for Raw, and who could it be? Maybe Christian, Cody Rhodes perhaps? Nope, John Cena. Not only did it make the final draft pick of the night meaningless, not only did it make the first draft pick of the night meaningless, but it meant that we were right back where we started, with John Cena running the main event scene of Raw as he had been for the prior 6 years. No wonder they didn't do another draft for 5 years. I don't know that I would have been that offended if they had just drafted him in the first place, but this was their big play. This was their big idea for the night. And what was the point? I must reiterate, what was the reason? And that's our list. Please make sure that you subscribe to partsFUNknown so you never miss a fun list just like it. And maybe check out the latest edition of Survival Series by clicking the link above. Jam that jam.
Okay.
Well, that doesn't inspire confidence. And perhaps the next thing that I say won't either.
Okay.
And here's the twist.
No, there doesn't need to be a twist. There doesn't need to be a twist. Let me be happy for a day. Let me be happy for one day, Tempest.